This is a study of fraternal twins, Danny and Gregory. Danny and Gregory were filmed 7 times between the ages of 4 months and 15 months. Danny will usually be on the right of the screen and Gregory on the left. This film attempts to analyze reflex development and motor behavior and to show their relationship to each other. In filming fraternal twins, the rate and sequence of development between 2 children can be compared. Twins offer a unique opportunity to study development because the differences in age and environment are minimal. A longitudinal study, that is, sequential filming of the same infants over a period of time, permits more valid observations about growth and development. This study of motor development consists of an integration of reflexes with purposeful movements. We observed that Danny and Gregory developed at different rates and that the sequence in which they achieved certain motor acts varied. This film is divided into 2 parts. Part 1 is the development of movements leading to sitting and standing and the postural reflexes which help the babies maintain these upright positions. In the development of movement, there are 3 major steps. The first 2 are discussed here. The first shows no organization of movement, and the second one demonstrates symmetry of movement, whereby the arms move together and the legs move together. At 4 months, flexion or bending of the limbs predominates in both babies. Spontaneous movements are random, short, and jerky. They are without rhythm and without purpose. Differences are evident even at this age. While Danny's arms are moving in a primitive, disorganized manner, Gregory's movements are smoother. His arms and legs are symmetrically placed, suggesting an awareness of the unity of both sides of the body. This is more developed than Danny's random behavior. Organization of early movement depends on reflexes. Some reflexes appear early. They are gradually inhibited as their persistence would interfere with motion. Other reflexes appear later and at first dominate behavior. They then diminish so that the infant makes use of them but is not dominated by them. Reflexes in a normal child cannot be demonstrated consistently. In early development, turning the head to one side elicits extension on the side toward which the head is turned. At the same time, the opposite side flexes. This is called the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex and is diagrammed in Figure 1. The presence of this reflex prevents the infant from turning over. When the reflex has been inhibited, turning of the head then results in a log roll of the entire body, as in Figure 2. The body moves in concert, both upper and lower halves as one unit. In order to roll over more easily, this unified response must be dissociated. That is, the upper or lower half of the body must be able to pivot independently, as in Figure 3. At 4 months, the head is the pivotal point for movement. Turning the head to the side elicits the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. Note that the arms toward which the face is turned extend. By 5½ months, the reflex has been inhibited, and now the entire body follows the head direction in a log roll. If the pelvis is turned or rotated, the body aligns itself with the pelvis so that again the log roll is observed. Initially, the baby's posture is dominated by flexion. Flexion is bending of the limbs, Figure 1. This is gradually replaced by extension in the baby's attempts to overcome gravity. Extension is straightening of the limbs. Extensor tone develops first in the head and neck, Figure 2. The tendency of the head to attain the upright position occurs early and depends on 2 factors. 1, the labyrinths of the inner ear, which find equilibrium when the head is upright, and 2, the eyes, which seek the horizontal direction. These comprise head writing, followed by arm extension and trunk extension, which lead to sitting and creeping. Figures 3 and 4. With leg extension, the upright posture is inevitable, Figure 5. Early head riding is dominated by the reflex tendency to have the eyes and the head directed forward. The extensor tone develops from the head and neck downwards. Gregory, on the left, shows extension of the head, arms, and upper trunk. His legs show some extension. Danny, on the right, in comparison, has a wobbly head and takes no weight on his arms. His legs are quite flexed and still engaged in much random activity. An early response to being suspended prone or face down is extension of the head, arms, trunk, and legs. This is called the Landau reflex, figure 1. At the same time period, forced extension or lifting of the head reinforces extension of the arms, trunk, and legs, figure 2. Conversely, forced flexion or bending of the head results in flexion of the arms and legs under the body, figure 3. This emphasizes that the body reacts uniformly to head position at this early age. When the babies are suspended prone at 4 months, the stimulus of gravity elicits extension, the Landau reflex. At this age, it is most apparent in the head and upper trunk. Gregory's leg movements are rhythmic and symmetrical. When the head is forcibly flexed, the limbs do the same. And when the head is extended, the limbs extend. We have seen movement progress from being random and disorganized to being symmetrical and rhythmic, but where head position dominates limb position. The next movement pattern is one of dissociation. The limbs become independent of the head, as in pivoting, and the upper limbs become independent of the lower limbs, as in rocking motions. Finally, the right and left limbs dissociate, permitting reciprocal movements, as in creeping. Note the reciprocal movements in Gregory's legs on the left and in Danny's arms on the right. By 11 months, Gregory has outgrown the Landau reflex and shows much relaxation. Danny still shows some reflex extension in this position. When the Landau reflex has been diminished, prone posture no longer dictates extension. That is, the baby has freedom to choose his position, figure 1. Whereas earlier, forced flexion of the head resulted in flexion of the body, now the opposite occurs, figure 2. Forced head extension, which previously evoked extension of the limbs, now results in flexion of the arms and legs beneath the body, figure 3. This dissociation between head and limb position prepares the baby for the quadruped posture. To demonstrate, at 7 months, head flexion in Danny on the right elicits limb extension, most noted in the legs, and head extension elicits arm and leg flexion, which will help him to assume a creeping position. At 7 months, the upper and lower halves of the body are no longer moving as a unit. This is another example of dissociation contributing to more mobility, and independent rolling is now possible. This additional mobility permits the child to get to creeping and sitting postures. Also, at 7 months, Gregory is moving the upper and lower halves of his body independently and is thus able to crawl about. At 9 months, note Danny's head remains steady while the limbs alternately flex and extend. This demonstrates freedom of limb movement from head position, and this early rocking is a precursor to creeping. Gregory, at 9 months, demonstrates creeping. The right and the left halves of the body have dissociated, and reciprocal motions are permitted. Another example of dissociation is that of the upper half of the body from the lower half, resulting in a pivot, as seen in both babies. This ability to rotate the trunk permits sitting independence. Gregory achieved independent sitting at about 7 months, and Danny at about 9 months. The development of trunk stability for sitting posture depends on head, neck, and trunk control. The development of this control is demonstrated by trunk extension and an activity called pull to sitting. When an infant is pulled to a sitting position, the lack of trunk stability is so great that the head hangs back and the trunk curves, figure 1. Later, as in figure 2, the The back shows its developing extensor tone, but the head cannot remain balanced. Finally, the head, neck, and trunk show the stability necessary for sitting. Figure 3. When pulled to sitting at 5½ months, Danny's head lags. Note the lack of trunk extension. Gregory shows less head lag and more extensor tone than Danny at the same age. By 7 months, Gregory's head is aligned with the body, whereas Danny's head still lags. Note the difference in back posture. And by 11 months, stability is present during the pull-up and also when they are lowered back to a supine position. At 4 months, when the babies are held so that they are flexed at the hips, they tend toward an upright position. The head-righting reflexes and the developing extensor tone contribute to this. The head and neck are the first to show extension. Gregory on the left demonstrates this more than Danny. At 5½ months, Danny on the right has not yet achieved trunk extension. Gregory raises himself up and shows some balance of the extended trunk. By 7 months, Gregory is stable in this position. Danny slowly achieves trunk extension and a wobbly semblance of balance. By 9 months, the extensor tone of head, neck, and trunk is dominant in both babies. Independent sitting requires trunk stability and balance reactions in an upright position. Balance reactions which allow the child to maintain upright positions are reflexes. At first they are strong, and later modified and integrated into functional activities. They persist throughout life. There are 2 types of balance reactions: equilibrium reactions, shown in figures 1 and 3, and protective reactions, shown in figures 2 and 4. Equilibrium reactions develop first. They are the initial responses to displacement. Figures 1 and 3 show these reactions in early and in later development. In figure 1, the equilibrium reaction to minimal displacement is that the head and limbs reach out to keep the body balanced over its base of support. In figure 3, later development, minimal displacement evokes the same equilibrium responses, but they are more refined and require less effort. This is accomplished by subtle changes in trunk alignment. The protective reactions develop later and protect the child from a fall in the event that the equilibrium reactions are not fully developed or are insufficient to resist the displacement force. Figures 2 and 4 show the protective reactions in early and later development. In figure 2, the postural reactions to maximal displacement are not present and the baby falls. In figure 4, later development, the baby now has a protective response. That is, where a fall is inevitable, the arm and leg reach out to catch him, thereby creating a new base of support. We will now look at several examples of the developing balance reactions in various positions. An early response to sudden backwards displacement of the head evokes an erratic total body response called the Morrow reflex. It has no known function in man. Note the arms spread out, the fingers extend, and the movements are jerky. At 7 months, the Morrow reflex is present but less marked. In Danny and Gregory, it did not disappear until they were sitting independently, when it was replaced by a useful reflex. When the babies are displaced sideways, developing equilibrium reactions are noted in the head, the arms, and a little in the legs. Gregory is on the left, Danny is on the right. When tipped downwards, there is no attempt made to break the fall. Instead of reaching, the arms and fists are clenched. When tilted sideways from a supine position, Gregory shows the same equilibrium responses of the arm and leg, as does Danny when tipped from the prone position. Now the arms reach out as protection when a fall is simulated, evidenced by Gregory more than by Danny. At 11 months, the horizontal displacement shows some response in Danny, but less in Gregory on the left. The babies feel less threatened and movements are less exaggerated. Danny's left arm shows a protective reaction as he reaches out to catch himself. When tipped backwards, the equilibrium response of the forward reach is sufficient to maintain sitting posture. Still at 11 months, note the protective responses which maintain the quadruped position for creeping. Gregory shows a strong forward protective response. When rolled from a quadruped position, the protective response is noted first, followed by a strong equilibrium response of the opposite extremities. Now the arms reach out fully to protect the baby from a simulated fall. The same equilibrium and protective reactions are noted when the baby is displaced at 15 months. But these responses are now minimal, controlled, and efficient, thereby showing coordination. Note that the baby usually ends up in a functional position. A review of balance follows, illustrated by a sequence of developing sitting balance. At 4 months, the heads are wobbly. The arms are way out to the sides in attempts to maintain equilibrium. The trunks are rounded and show little stability. Obviously, independent sitting is not yet possible. At 5.5 months, the head control has improved. The trunks are still rounded. Equilibrium responses of the arms to minimal displacement are marked. Independent sitting has not yet been achieved. Gregory is on the left. He shows a more extended back than Danny. At 7 months, Gregory on the left is sitting independently. Minimal displacement evokes no noticeable equilibrium responses. The babies have more control. Protective responses are developing. Note the arms begin to reach out to break a potential fall. At 9 months, the babies can also play while sitting. Note Gregory's beginning protective response to backwards displacement. At 11 months, Gregory's protective response to backwards displacement is still incomplete. 13 months shows further refinement of the balance reactions in that they occur with more speed and control. 15 months shows better sitting balance together with play activity. Now displacement evokes almost no equilibrium reactions of the extremities. Balance is economically handled with minimal trunk adjustments. Let us now look at what is happening with extensor tone development in the lower extremities and the accompanying postural reactions. As we have seen, early reactions of flexion are replaced by extension and finally by a balance between these opposing muscle groups. When the baby is held up, as in Figure 1, the initial stage of flexion precludes support. This is the negative support reaction. With developing extensor tone, weight-bearing elicits straightening of the legs. This is the positive support reaction, illustrated by Figure 2. It is a reflex and does not mean that the baby is ready to stand independently. In Figure 3, when the weight is displaced to one side, the leg on the opposite side withdraws. Later, as in Figure 4, the baby not only withdraws the leg, but places it down again. This is a stepping reaction. The legs remain planted far apart for balance. This stepping appears to be an equilibrium reaction. Later on, as in Figure 5, when the weight is displaced to one side, a protective reaction is present. The leg on the side toward which the child is displaced moves over, thereby changing the base of support. Thus it appears that the initial steps are for balance, and that early locomotion may be regarded as a series of attempts to regain balance. The lower limbs are the last to develop extensor tone. The appearance of extensor tone is reflexly elicited by pressure from the floor. At 4 months, Gregory on the left shows this positive support reaction. Stepping responses to removed foot pressure are noted. The foot is immature and is dominated by a grasp reflex, meaning that the toes curl in response to the stimulus of the carpet. The entire leg is rigid. At 5.5 months, Gregory's legs, seen on the left, are no longer rigid whereas Danny is just beginning to show the positive support reaction in his right leg. The left leg is not ready to become an extension pillar, and this represents a negative support reaction. At 9 months, Danny on the right shows fully developed extensor tone. Gregory, at the same age, now shows a balance between flexion and extension, providing him with more mobility. At the same age of 9 months, Gregory is standing unsteadily with minimal support and is stepping back and forth in response to displacement. At 11 months, Danny's stepping responses are slow and inadequate. He shows excessive motion of the arms, as compared to Gregory, who shows a more controlled posture and good stepping responses. At this age of 11 months, both babies are continually pulling themselves up to standing positions. By 13 months, Danny shows stepping reactions which are slow and still inadequate. Gregory is now walking independently. Note his wide-based gait and the raised arms for added balance. By 15 months, Danny's stepping reactions are more refined. His arm control is improved. Gregory is now walking with a narrow base of support, requiring less effort and concentration. He is able to play at the same time. Danny, at the same age, is able to get to the standing position alone, even though he is not walking independently. This is contrary to the usual pattern of development. We have seen that desire for upright positions dominates early development, and that to maintain the upright postures, certain balance reactions are necessary. Part 2 of this film explores coordination. The development of coordination is occurring at the same time as the development of upright posture and balance. Coordination is a further development of movement. In the first part of this film, we follow the progression from lack of organization to a unity of body movement, and then to a dissociation of head and limbs. Coordination involves a further dissociation of body parts. It is exemplified by skillful and efficient motion. Deliberate symmetrical movement of the arms for clapping means the rest of the body must remain still. Waving is a deliberate unilateral motion in which the other arm should remain quiet. Further dissociation appears as the distal muscles of the hand and fingers are able to move independently of the proximal shoulder muscles, permitting finer control and coordination. Danny on the right and Gregory on the left are 11 months old. Their play activity demonstrates developing coordination of the upper extremities. The proximal shoulder muscles direct the arm, and the distal wrist and hand muscles act independently of the shoulder to manipulate the toy. Motion is initially dependent on reflex activity, which is in turn provoked by sensation. The mouth, the eye, and the hand are the primary centers for receiving sensory stimuli. Sensory input provokes motor activity. Initially, this motor activity is reflex, such as rooting, sucking, and grasping. As we have seen in Part 1, some of the basic reflexes will be diminished and/or refined, thereby permitting more voluntary control. If a motor activity is pleasing, the baby repeats it, and with practice, he develops motor skills. A skill is a learned act performed with speed, accuracy, and minimal effort. The mouth and adjacent skin areas are very sensitive to touch, causing the head to turn toward the stimulus. This is called the rooting reflex and helps the baby find the nipple for feeding. The presence of something in the mouth usually elicits the sucking reflex necessary for early feeding. Danny even attempts to suck at solid foods. Note the protrusion of the tongue and activity of the lips. Gregory, at 4 months, introduces muscles of the face and jaw, which assist the tongue in producing chewing motions. The motions are not smooth and do not require fine control of the muscles. As more control of the mouth develops, sounds are attempted and sometimes imitated. Gregory at first attempted ah and ba-ba sounds, requiring little dissociation of muscles of the tongue and palate. Danny also uses visual and tactile cues for sound formation. Articulate speech requires practice, as does any motor skill. The oral muscles get practice with food, with sounds, and with objects placed in the mouth. The eye is a second sensory focus of early development. The eyes influence head position and dominate early play activity. Gregory's eyes intently describe the object. The ability to direct the eyes to what the hand is touching or to place the hand on what the eyes are seeing is a motor skill dependent on practice and perception. At 4 months, Danny's eyes follow a moving object across the midline. But he does not follow it up or down, nor does he reach for it. At the same age, Gregory's eyes follow across the midline and up and down, but he does not reach for it either. Danny shows increasing ability to follow, although his head control is unsteady. Now he is following vertically and diagonally. Gregory follows easily at the same age and reaches out to grasp and explore the rattle. The hand is now able to touch what the eye is seeing, and may even bring the object to the mouth for further information. Danny is now reaching out for the rattle. His arm is clumsy and rigid, but note that his finger control is quite good. The coordination between the eyes and the hand implies sophisticated control. The arm has to be directed toward the object. The distance has to be correctly judged in 3 dimensions. The hand grasp must accommodate the object, and the hand must be able to release the object. These steps comprise perceptual and motor skills. Skills may be divided into gross and fine motor skills. The order of achievement of skills can vary, although the usual pattern is that gross motor skills develop before the fine motor skills. Gross motor skills relate to the development of motor skills involving shoulder, hip, and trunk muscles. Gregory showed the general tendency to develop gross motor skills before fine skills. Fine motor skills relate to the control of the smaller, more distal musculature. Increasing speed of motion, accuracy of limb placement, and efficiency of muscle control are the primary constituents of motor skill. To look at the development of gross motor skill, we will be concentrating on the areas of dissociation of the upper limbs from the trunk. This will involve unilateral motions, such as reaching and waving, symmetrical motions, such as clapping, and reciprocal motions, as in creeping. Gregory on the left shows developing use of the upper extremities. He can shift his weight to one arm and direct the other towards the ball. The ability to reach and grasp an object requires that the limb can move to where the eyes are directed. Gregory first misjudges the distance and then descends on the bottle with a broad swipe, using the entire upper extremity as a unit. There is no dissociation of the forearm, wrist, or hand from the arm. Danny and Gregory exhibit dissociation of the upper limbs from the trunk. The wrist and hand are independent of the arms in reaching out to push the ball around. Gregory also shows dissociation of the 2 arms by using them reciprocally for creeping. His motion is also more rhythmic than Danny's. At 11 months, independent sitting and play are occurring simultaneously. Increased dexterity of shoulder muscles permits directional placement of toys and some interaction. Gregory uses both arms rhythmically for clapping and other hand games, and can also use his arms separately, as in waving. Danny at the same age does not yet show bilateral rhythmic clapping. Danny's clapping is still dominated by one arm, and his waving shows little dissociation in the other arm. Danny Danny's shoulder and upper arm are held rigidly and turned inwards. His facile hand is guided by poorly coordinated proximal muscles. By contrast, Gregory shows a smooth and mature pattern of arm control. However, the hand appears awkward and not well dissociated. Finally, Danny's clapping is bilateral and smooth. This improvement in rhythm, direction, and muscular control contributes to increasing coordination. Progressing with the development of movement, we will finally see the development of fine motor skills. The distal muscles become dissociated from the proximal muscles, permitting independent finger control for picking up small objects. Fine motor skills will be demonstrated by the development of hand control, including grasp, manipulation, and release. Danny developed fine skills more quickly than Gregory, and he also showed fine motor skills before his gross skills were well developed. This is contrary to the usual pattern. The initial preparations for hand grasp are reflex. Contact with the palm elicits a grasp reflex early in life. Gregory still demonstrates some grasp reflex. Hand contact on the floor results in a partially fisted hand. This is not compatible with weight bearing. Seeing the hand, knowing where it is and what it is doing, are important exploratory steps the child makes in learning to handle objects. At 9 months, Gregory's grasp on the spoon is awkward. The hand is stiff and as yet shows no independent finger control. At the same age, Danny shows free wrist motions. He changes hands while exploring the spoon and exhibits some independent finger control. At 11 months, Gregory still has an awkward hand, whereas Danny at the same age shows the ability to use the fingers individually. Now we see that Gregory shows improved coordination by using fewer and more rapid motions to retrieve the crumb. And Danny by this time has become so skilled that he has introduced creative variations of his own. At the same age, Gregory shows a smooth pattern of arm control, reflecting gross motor skill, but his hand is still awkward. Note that the release is tense. And Danny, who is fatigued, clearly demonstrates that release is an active phenomenon. Ball playing integrates visual perception with gross and fine motor skills. Gregory's shoulder control is good, but without well-developed wrist and hand coordination, the release is tense and not well directed. Danny is able to direct the ball to the receiver skillfully. His wrist and hand coordination permit him to release the ball with speed and accuracy. The following sequences of play summarize the principles of development which we have seen. At 4 months, developing extensor tone is evident in the head and arms of Gregory. The ball is of interest, but evokes little motor response at this time. At 5½ months, both babies are intent on exploring the ball. Note that Gregory, on the left, has extended legs, whereas Danny's are still flexed. Danny is supported on his elbows. He cannot shift weight to one arm, and his dependence on both forearms prohibits him from reaching for the ball. The mouth and the hands are early exploratory tools. By 7 months, Gregory can drag himself toward the ball, keeping his head up. He can shift his weight to one arm, allowing him to explore more freely. At 9 months, Danny is shifting his weight from arm to arm and pivoting. The increased dissociation of the head and limbs from the trunk provides more mobility for both babies. At 11 months, Danny's voluntary release of an object permits interactive play. Gregory does not yet control the direction of his release. At 13 months, play activities are often dominated by attempts to be upright. By 15 months, increased coordination is reflected by Danny's skillful ball playing. Danny and Gregory have been developing at different rates, and the sequence in which they achieved certain motor acts varied.